Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm delighted to bring to you the wonderful Stephanie Redcross. So I'm just going to read Steph's bio out so you can get to know her. Back in 2009, long before veganism became trendy, Stephanie Redcross started developing tools, training, and support for vegan business owners. Before that, she'd gained 15 years of marketing experience with both small businesses and Fortune 500 companies. Based in Florida, Stephanie inspires people to turn their vegan passion into successful businesses of all types, including both products and services, by providing impactful coaching and consultancy, as well as online courses, business boot camps, the Pivot podcast, regular LinkedIn live sessions, and a free community of vegan entrepreneurs. Steph, you do so much. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this opportunity.
I am really excited because, you and I have become friends and I've interviewed you in the past, mainly because you are obviously a total expert in all things vegan business. But what I love about today's conversation is we're going to get a little bit more personal, and it's perfect timing because I know you literally at the time of this interview, I think you just recently run an event, an online event called Coming Out of Your Shell on Social Media, where you're talking more about yourself. So this is, I think, is perfect timing. So I'm really looking forward to having a little bit of a different conversation with you. So, well, first of all, tell us what, like, the fact is, because I know I've watched you from afar from, several years now, and I've seen your social media, and a lot of it's been around tips for business and vegan business. And then you've had some stuff around some of your favorite books or food, but I've not seen a whole lot about you, kind of a bit more personally. And I know now you're really keen to share more of that. So why have you decided to come out of your shell on social media now?
Well, I would say two shifts have happened kind of in my business that are kind of encouraging me and inspiring me to kind of come out of my shell. The first shift is really just the times we're in right now with the pandemic. I used to travel a lot. I used to go to a lot of veg fests. I almost had this like nice rhythm around seeing people at certain events, checking in with them, and kind of, the time we would sit down for lunch or late in the day or when I arrived, and I was able to like catch up with people. We kind of got that personal connection, and it got that time to really, really find out how people were doing. But without that travel, without those opportunities, what I've been finding is sometimes I feel a little disconnected. Sometimes I feel a little bit more distance between me and colleagues, and also me just meeting new people and kind of interacting and talking with people. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to do things differently in my business this year, where I almost fostered those kind of interactions and activities in the social media sphere in a way that maybe is a little different than what I've done before, or the way I've done like marketing and promotion and, expert advice as an example. But now really just kind of chit-chatting and talking with people, because most people really get to know me when they become my client, or they really get to know me like in our scenario where we get to be friends, we talk about different topics. We get to collaborate and ask each other ideas. And what I'm finding is the more I open up, the more not only do people kind of get to know me, but I get to have some of those deeper relationships. And I think this day and age, I'm craving more of that. And I'm also finding that I can be of help to people in more ways. The more I kind of pull back the curtain, the more I make myself available to be out there and talking with people, and the more comfortable I am with kind of even voicing my opinion on things that might be outside of the traditional vegan business world.
I love that. I love that. And we're gonna touch on that, what you just said there. But first of all, tell me a little bit more about you, just kind of in a nutshell. Tell us a little bit more about you. So where did you grow up? A little bit about your family life. Like, who is Stephanie Redcross outside of vegan business expert?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to kind of, pull yourself apart into pieces, because I kind of feel like I'm really a product of so many experiences I've had. I grew up in Philly, so I'm ultimately a Philly girl through and through. My husband's from Philly, so, we're always getting ready for anything Philly. We're all suited up, ready to go, and so forth. So I have that city pride, at hometown pride, but I also lived in a lot of different cities. I went to school at University of Michigan, so I spent a good amount of time in Michigan, and I have a huge affinity for that area, for the people that I've met. My first job out of college was in Chicago, or Chicagoland area, I should say. So being in those areas, in a lot of the Chicago suburbs, I was there for almost 5 years. So I got to know a lot of great people. I got to know what it's like to live in the Midwest, which is totally different than living on the East Coast if you're in the US. It also was an opportunity for me to step out of kind of my world and my bubble. I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. We had an art business. We also owned a beer distributor. My parents did real estate, so I understood what it was like to kind of have a business that you grew and created, and what it meant for like the family to help support it, even though I was a kid. But as I got older, obviously, I was able to support and do things. So living outside of that family business with the family shadow in Philadelphia, because my family did some amazing things in Philly. And I got an opportunity by going to school in Michigan, living in Chicago, and then ultimately working for corporate America, which flew me all over the world and had me all over the world. I got a chance to stand on my own. I got a chance to see what it was like in the entrepreneurial land and what it was like in the corporate land, and see what I liked, what I didn't like. What are some of the things that made me stronger, even though they were painful?
Yeah.
And also what it was like to really establish home kind of wherever I am. I've learned to live in so many places, and explore in so many places, and connect with people in so many different environments, that I really am kind of a person that can set up shop, can work, can connect and hang out and explore any city, because I kind of feel like the world's my landscape. And I think that's just because of the way I grew up with my family and their businesses, and traveling as a kid. We did art shows. We did art shows in like cities all over the US. So we were traveling like at least once a month.
Wow.
And then with me having the opportunity, when I got to Chicago, when I went to school, I studied Japanese. So I got a chance to go to Japan. So I start getting that international bug. All of those things have kind of helped me be a person that tries to have a kind of wider view of just what I've experienced, and also be a person that really is interested in people, environment, culture, and also a person that, like I said, kind of feels like home can be anywhere. It's just every place you land, every place you go, it's just an opportunity for you to connect with people and build a home around you.
Yeah, great. I love that. And I'm going to touch on what you said there. I love what you said about having those experiences, being exposed to different ways of life, different people, different cultures. So that's going to lead nicely into my next question. And I know you touched on it earlier when you said, you're starting to maybe express opinions now that are outside the vegan business. And I know part of your event your online event that you just ran, it was about, not being afraid to take a stand. So, but how does that sit in? I'm curious, because I saw something, and I won't name any names, I saw something blow up on social media this week, actually, where a owner of a vegan business didn't put it on the business's social, but on their personal social, and it was set to public, like was talking, Trump 2020, and, putting stuff up that people would, some other stuff that people thought was racist, like a sense of humor, maybe was a bit racist, possibly transphobic, and it got kind of caned online by the vegan community. So I'm curious, how do you decide what to share? Because I believe that people are very nuanced. They're way more nuanced and complex than we like to think they are. We think, if someone's into vegan activism or any kind of activism, they're over here on the far left, and they check all these boxes. And then you've got if you're a Trump supporter, well, you must be over here on the right, and you're this, this, and this. Whereas people are way more complicated, and probably, a lot more kind of to the edges, at least, if not, towards the center. So how do you decide, how do you be authentic if your, views are, perhaps considered to be quite controversial, particularly to a certain part of your marketplace? So I'd be curious, how do you decide what you're going to say publicly, and how do you navigate that if you're your views are seen by some to be really kind of quite out there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to perfect it. But at the same time, I would also say I'm still learning too. So I don't want to make it sound like I figured it all out, because this year has been a totally different landscape as far as what can be discussed, what people are discussing out in the open. Even topics for me were like in my community, like in my community, as an African American, it was like, oh, we talked about it there, but we don't really talk about these things online. We don't really talk about these issues and challenges that we have day to day. And that's been turned upside down. And I think rightfully so. I'm really excited about these conversations coming out, especially in the US. And some of them are even difficult for me because they have been so internal for so long that having that public discussion is a little bit different. And having a discussion with someone who just doesn't understand the the challenges, the fears, the concerns that, I have as a Black woman. But I think what we all have to do is we have to know the difference between venting and expressing an opinion or an idea. I think sometimes we mix them up and we start to use like our social media as like that megaphone, like we were at a rally, or that we were on the street corner and we're just talking about how we're feeling in that stream of thought and just getting that information out. And as a business owner, you have a little bit more responsibility. You have a little bit more responsibility on what messages do you want to put out there. And I think we have to sometimes take a step back and make sure that when we're communicating, you're not just communicating the frustration, the anger, and you're just putting that out in the world, because you're literally putting a hot potato out in the world. And then you're responsible for what happens. Now, for some people, they're fine with it. Some people, that's what they want to do. That is the purpose of it. And that's okay. If that is your purpose, then you have to be ready for that reverb that comes back to you. But I think for many people, their purpose is really something different. So if they sat down and thought less about the fact that they just have to get it out and just get their frustration or their emotion out, and if they sat down and said, as an entrepreneur, what am I really trying to do here? What message am I getting out? And who am I speaking to? And what am I trying to drive change with? Because arguing, fighting, creating a negative space around your brand may not get you the result that you wanted. So therefore, if you start with the results, start with the purpose, I think it makes it a little bit easier to navigate not just what you share, but ultimately how you share it. Because how you share it is normally where most people get into those sticky situations.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's really great the way you've put that, because you're right. The intent is, it's just like you've seen something, you're like, right, I'm just going to put that out there. And either maybe you want likes, or you want, this, or you want to be controversial for the sake of it, then yeah. But I like that about the intent. I mean, it is tricky because I'm even navigating it myself, like, because in the past, like in my journalism career, because I was writing opinion pieces that, might have been considered inflammatory. Whereas now I am I find I'm stopping myself sometimes thinking, right, do I really want to put that out? But then I'm worrying, but am I self-censoring? You know what I mean? There's those conversations that are going on, and it's like, well, if I put that out, are people going to say that about me? And it's like juggling all of that. And you're right, it is kind of a different landscape just because of the pandemic. People, I think, are in a different headspace and perhaps less tolerant, and we're seeing so much division in the vegan community, as well as you've said, in other communities around these things. But I like that. I think that was a really good tip about thinking about the intent, and if you're genuinely putting something out for discussion, that can be helpful. Thank you.
And just add one thing, and maybe I'll get in trouble for this too, but not everyone's supposed to like you. Like, I think sometimes we get confused, like we're in kind of kindergarten again, and we think that like everyone should like what I say and how I say it. If you have an opinion, that's the point of an opinion. You are picking a side, and there's going to be somebody that disagrees with you. And to your point earlier, there's going to be somebody who's in the vegan community, someone who wears like 5 of the t-shirts that you would wear. They're going to wear the same ones and still disagree with you. Yeah. And I think we have to get a little bit of comfort with the idea that if you want to live in this public sphere, if you want to live in a place where you do express your opinions, that there are going to be people that you think look like you, feel like you, see the world like you, and they won't see the world like you.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to either decide, how am I going to live in that space? How am I going to live in that world? And start to understand, when is it time for dialogue versus opinions? When is it time for debate? And when is it time to let things go? Because you could spend hours debating with people online and trying to get people to agree with you and get people to like you. But at the end of the day, it's more about your intent. And if your intent is to drive change, sometimes you're going to create a little bit of tension out there,
Yeah.
to make people think differently. I mean,
Yeah.
think about it. Even for many of us that just try to get our family members to go vegan, in the beginning, it was probably a little bit of tension. There might have been a little bit of arguments. There might have been a holiday meal that didn't go so well because you brought your own dishes. And you had to work through that. You have
Yeah.
to allow that change to happen. So I just say that for people to realize that if you're trying to drive change in different perspectives, it takes time. It's not just one message. So sometimes you're going to have to live in a moment where people may be a little bit upset, a little disappointed, a
Yeah.
little bit of
Yeah.
unfolding
Yeah.
through the process.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I think it's just really important. And I think now more than ever, and I say I'm kind of navigating that myself. So I appreciate what you're saying there. Now I know that you've said in other interviews that when you were younger, you struggled with what you perceived women were allowed or not allowed to do as compared to men in many businesses and careers. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this is probably like one of my biggest challenges and journeys and growth opportunities for Stephanie Redcross West is, where I see myself and females in the world. Because for me, when I grew up, when I started to realize there was a double standard, when I started to realize that there were things that men could do that I couldn't do, and when I say couldn't do, meaning I would get such negative responses in society.
Like
I
what?
would get pushback on things. I would get told that females don't normally do that, or females, it's not that, or even those silly things about things like being ladylike, and all of that. Because I was a tom girl. I loved sports. I played basketball. I played basketball with the guys. I went down to the local playground and, played outside and fell on the cement and was like, okay, didn't need a Band-Aid. I'm getting back in the game. So I was that kind of female. And I also loved being female. Like, I still would wear my skirts and my dresses. I was definitely anti-pink most of my life, but I still, engaged in a lot of things that were highly feminine. So, I really wanted myself to be, I wanted to be able to express myself and do things that might have fallen in the male camp or a traditional female camp in a sense. But where it got much harder is when I went into the business world, because how I would speak or when I would talk or when I was seen as aggressive or assertive, those things were seen as a little bit more negative, or I would get labels about being pushy. I had this really cute, I guess I would call it cute. I don't know how others would feel, but I used to get this, I had this term that people would say that I was pushy nice. And when I was called the first time, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Then as I unpacked it as I got earlier, I was like, it's funny how people see me as pushy when I get the job done. And that's how I was perceived, in a lot of my corporate life, that you gave Stephanie a task, she got it done. But I would always get some of those like negative, pushy kind of labels because that's how females were perceived. They weren't necessarily rewarded for stepping up, for saying, I'll be first at bat, or I'll do something. And I feel like I always had to figure out, how do I want to navigate that? When do I want to fight it? And I think when I was younger, I fought it a little bit more than I should have. So I think that's just with age. But I think there's such an
What do you say
opportunity
when you
for.
said you fought it? What do you mean? Like, do you mean did you just kind of answer back or be so like what did you do when you fought back? What did that look
When I
like?
fought it, meaning I would actively say to people that that's not fair. It's a double standard. I would really point it out. I would almost say it like, almost like I'm looking around the room, like, doesn't everyone see this? That's happening? Like, to me, it was so obvious. And most people would kind of see it as it wasn't a big deal. Or that, if females weren't getting promoted like males were getting promoted, or when it was time to do presentations, the men would do the presentations and the women would be in the room and they could chime in, but they weren't always chosen to lead the presentations. Or when I get tapped on the shoulder to do something that was, I came in, with my VP title, and someone would ask me to bring in the snacks into the room. And it wasn't that I wasn't at the table as a VP. I mean, I still would come in and speak and do the presentation, but it was a little bit weird that the females were asked to bring in the snacks from the other room or bring in those things. And I feel like I would bring it up as like injustices. I would bring them up as, doesn't make any sense, like I was going to start picketing in the middle of a conference room. And I think I learned over time that maybe that wasn't the best way to do it. Maybe someone consciously wasn't trying to, you know, put me in a box. They weren't consciously choosing females, that it was really more that sometimes they needed a discussion. That not everyone was really doing things to me or to females. And I had to learn that sometimes I had to bring it up in a different environment, in a different space, to have the discussion so that the correction could be made in the future, as opposed to, lighting the meeting on fire in the moment.
I get that. It reminds me of when I was back in at uni at college. So this would have been in the late 80s, and I was doing dance and drama. And I remember being in some of the lectures, the classes. There was the automatic default to a general person as he. And every time that I remember being in class, every time that would happen, I'd be like, she or that. You know what I mean? And it would be like, oh, feminine. You know what I mean? And it would, you could see people kind of rolling their eyes, going, oh, it's the feminist kind of things. That reminded me of that when you said that. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's an interesting one. I actually recently interviewed Suzanne Curlew Sue, in the UK, and she said something similar about situations that came up at work that were to do with race as well with her, because she's a black woman, Jamaican English, and she said something similar, that it was I like the way what she said. It was the way she handled it was she didn't necessarily want, like, the people would offer, right, let's just fire that person, and she was like, no, I actually want to create the change so that they get it. And it sounds kind of something similar for you. You decided a different route. Sometimes there's a different route to doing things, which is not to say that bringing something up in the moment or that kind of direct action is wrong. It's just you've got to weigh up how best to handle a situation. Now, I know that you also had a situation, and I know you can only talk about it to a certain degree because of non-disclosure, but I know there was a situation where you experienced harassment and discrimination at a particular workplace. Can you talk us through how did that impact you? So you don't need to go necessarily into the details of it, because I know you can't, but just how did that impact you at the time? How did it impact you over time? And looking back now, what do you see as potentially the gift in it, if that's maybe a little bit controversial?
Yeah, I think the first time, when it happens to you, I think for the first time, is you think it's almost your fault in the beginning. You think you should have done something differently, that you should have tried this. And I think you take the responsibility on your shoulders. So when it happens, you almost start to feel sad, and, you really can sometimes do too much self-examination, and not realizing that in many cases, you weren't responsible for it. Someone else was harassing you. You know what I mean? No matter what you would have done, their behavior may have never changed. Their behavior is their behavior, and their behavior they'll own. And all I can own is my behavior and my response. So I think understanding that, and understanding that also sometimes these things just happen. No matter what you do, no matter how straight of a path you walk on, no matter what organization you're in, no matter what position you're in, that sometimes you're going to be harassed. It's going to happen. I mean, when you look at the stats, the stats are really high at the number of women that are harassed at work, the number of incidents that happen to a lot of females. So if you know the stats are high, I think understanding that it could happen and not being kind of turning the blame or getting into the blame or whose fault it is, I think is a really the big thing that I learned. And I learned later on, like after it happened. And a thing that if anybody is listening now or it's happening to them, I really hope that you talk to someone about it. Because at the time, it wasn't as out in the open as it is today. So it wasn't an easy thing to discuss. I wasn't even sure what to do with those emotions. I wasn't even sure how to handle it. And I mean, I was lucky when it happened younger in my career that I was able to, bounce back with a great opportunity. I had just things worked, my family supported me, and I was able to go to another job. And I worked really hard to do it. And things worked out for me. But I think for some people, it may not be as easy to shift. So finding someone you can talk to, and especially in this environment where people can jump on LinkedIn, where people can collaborate, find someone that can help you navigate it, I think is really key. Because when you're the victim in it, sometimes you can't see the other side and see the other angles. And I think that's one thing that, like when you say about the lasting change, impact of it, I think it in the beginning had me a little bit of doubting, when I should be assertive, when should I be aggressive. I had got this feedback from someone once when I was in when I was doing what they kind of call financial auditing. So when I was doing a lot of financial auditing, we would often have to present to the CEOs in those businesses. Now I was still a marketer, heart to heart, that's my thing, but I wanted to know the financial side and how to audit businesses and so forth, because I believe the finances are just the heart of a business, and it helped me be a better marketer. But when I was doing it and I was coming up against someone who's the CEO, and I was fairly young in my career, they would do tactics to intimidate us. And someone gave me feedback and talked about how I would let someone sometimes intimidate me in a meeting. So if I said something and they disagreed, they would lean towards me and then I would lean back. Now, I mean, we're across the table, so it wasn't a violent interaction. I don't mean to make it sound like they were coming after me. But what they were doing is they were showing a level of dominance. They were showing a level of pushing forward and using that physical plane to do it. And what I was doing is I was allowing myself to go back, to take it, to almost kind of create a secondary position. And what was happening is I was finding, because of my experience when I was younger, where I had someone more senior to me bully me, when I had someone really push back on me, I was kind of getting into the mode of taking that second position, of leaning back, not retreating, but leaning back a little bit. And I think I want to make that distinction because for many of us who are like strong women, we don't retreat, but sometimes we take a step back that we shouldn't take. And when I got that feedback, that really helped me, because it helped me start to realize that I was internalizing how I should respond when I'm met with other aggression or assertion, or by others, and especially for men who would want to challenge me. And it gave me an opportunity to start to say, how do you want to handle these situations, Stephanie? How do you want to get to a place where if you're getting into a discussion or a debate with someone, how do you want to project yourself, not just in your tone? How do you want to project yourself physically? And where is your line? Where is your stance when you want to push back? And where's my stance for me? Because, everyone has a different personality. I know some people are more introverts and extroverts and, all that good stuff. So I think it's important for people to figure out where they want to push and how hard they want to push. I don't want people to feel like you got to be this major, like extrovert, because really in all reality, which we didn't really touch on, but like, I'm not really an extrovert. Like as a kid, I barely talked. I would sit in the room and my parents would be like, Stephanie, what do you want to eat? And I'd be like, I just shrugged my shoulders. I'm like one of those kids. So it wasn't until like I was in like 7th or 8th grade, I was like, I'm missing out on opportunity from being quiet. and I'm not missing out on anything anymore. So it started up. So I think it's like, that's why I say a lot of this stuff is life learned kind of experiences, is that you have to learn when you want to speak up. And then I had to figure out, when do I want to speak up and how do I want to speak up in a professional setting? How do I do it when I'm met with it, especially when someone's senior to you, and when I'm met with it when someone maybe in a position, especially a male, is using as a tactic to kind of shift the conversation. What do I want to do? And I think it's so important as leaders, as women, even as Black folks, because we got a lot of stereotypes that hit us, especially women. I get so upset when people want to say angry Black woman.
Yeah,
oh, that just makes my skin boil. And I think it's so important that we understand, where is that line and how do we want to handle it? Because it's important that we aren't bullied, and it's important that our messages are out there, and it's important that our voices are heard, because the world can't change if people don't know what we want. The world can't change if they don't know what's important to them. So to give you such a long answer to your question.
No, I like that. And it's interesting. But so I guess I'm curious, guys, like when you said about the thing, like, because that can be quite intimidating, particularly if it's, you know, like you said, somebody senior, and particularly if it's a male and they're literally physically kind of coming at you. So is it that when you're saying, because are you saying, right, if somebody does that, you need to kind of lean in, and does it then become this staring, like, how does it kind of work? I guess I'm trying to get to the point of, like, are we supposed, like, if somebody is behaving aggressively towards you, do you match them to stand up to them, so because they understand that? Or do you see what I mean? Because I know what you said about stepping back, because sometimes stepping back is a way to like diffuse a situation. So I'm just kind of curious as to, what do you think about if people are in that position where somebody's doing that? How is your way of kind of standing up for yourself without looking like you're retreating, but also without maybe kind of doing the same kind of behaviors that are equally perhaps aggressive, just because the other person understands that? Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. And I don't believe in aggression has to meet aggression. I don't mean it has to happen all the time or most of the time. And I really feel like when things start to escalate, a lot of times you can be firm without yelling. You can be firm without physically moving forward with people. I think a lot of that has to be with standing your ground, with really understanding. It's almost like not leaning forward and not leaning back. It's making sure where you started in your position, you're clear and you're firmly grounded in it. That's really what I think. And also it's the opportunity to not get as shaped up. You know, when someone starts to raise the energy in the room, the question is, if that's not where you want it to go, meaning if they had never raised the energy, if that's not what you were going to do, the idea is that you shouldn't raise up just because of them. You should only raise up when you want to raise up, when you think it's important to. So it's almost making sure that the way you communicate, the way you talk, the way you manage situations, that you find your place and you stay there. Now, it doesn't mean sometimes you don't need to get loud. It doesn't mean that sometimes you don't need to help people understand that, hey, there's a line here, don't step over it. But I don't think you always have to do it with screaming and yelling. And I don't think you have to retreat to get someone to understand your stance. And when I say sometimes, like when I say retreat, I mean, you just say, okay, yeah, whatever, that's fine. That's what I see as a retreat, or just, you know what I mean? You just kind of, you're exiting in a way that's not where you started the conversation or situation. But if you say something like, I don't think we're going to come to a conclusion here. I'm not sure we're going to agree on the best approach here. So what I think we should do is A, B, and C. Or if you say, you know what, we're getting kind of heated right now. And my point is not to really upset you, because that's not your point. If that really wasn't your point. And for me, I'm not trying to emotionally take people on journeys. Because when they go on an emotional journey, I got to go on an emotional journey. And I don't want to spend that kind of energy. Because most of the time, these things don't need that emotional journey, especially in business. That I rather say, you know, we're starting to get a little bit heated. Can we reconvene this tomorrow? Can we talk a little bit later? And I think that is that's not a retreat, that's reshifting the conversation so that you can have the discussion you must have, which may be a difficult discussion, but without the heated, whatever happened, the ramp up. And even if I ramped up, say I got out of control, coming back and saying, you know what, I got a little bit heated here. Can we regroup tomorrow? That is what I mean by standing your ground and putting your stance in place. And I really think getting comfortable with and being able to have those conversations is really key in just becoming really a better person.
Yeah.
And then ultimately a better leader.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Such good advice. Thank you. This is great. I'm loving talking to you about these topics because we haven't kind of discussed these kind of things before. I think it's great. Now, I noticed as well, you in another interview, you mentioned about failure and and feeling the disappointment of failure. Now, I know, for example, when you first started, because you're a pioneer, as you mentioned, in this whole vegan business space, you were doing this back in 2009. But I know initially, I think when I interviewed you for my book, actually, Vegan Ventures, you mentioned that when you first started out, you had these big ideas, like you wanted to be this big agency, but it didn't kind of work out. So I'm curious, technically, obviously in the entrepreneurial land, it's like, fail fast, and failure's a good thing because you learn, but you got to bounce back. You can't kind of stay there. So I'm just curious if you could expand a little bit on that, about allowing yourself to feel the pain and the disappointment of failure.
Yeah, I believe in that so wholeheartedly, that you have to be able to work through failure. Because it's not just having failure. It's not really about the idea that something didn't work out. It's really about you working through that emotion that you feel about it. It's working through the idea that, okay, that happened. Now what's next? And it's also about building a little bit of resilience in the way that you approach really anything in life, and definitely your business, because it's just like right now with everything that's going on in the world with the pandemic. A lot of the impact to many of our businesses we didn't control. The things that have hurt our businesses, or cut back the revenue in our businesses. I mean, I've been interviewing a ton of vegan business owners, and majority of people are like, this is my worst year ever. This is a year that, this is like the money I made when I first started my business 5, 10, 6 years ago, really long time ago. So for a lot of people, it's been a jarring experience. It's been a very difficult time. And I say that to say that's why you need to know how to work through setbacks. So it's not just failures. It's the idea that you're just, swimming along, everything feels like it's good, and then you smack into a wall. Or something that used to work in your business, even if it's a marketing campaign, even if it's a partnership that you have, things happen where partnerships dissolve. People decide to sell their business. Maybe their spouse is going to take over the business, and you have this great relationship with the other person, but the spouse and you don't get along as well. These things happen, and the more you start to allow yourself to work through these issues as opposed to rejecting them, because I think what a lot of people do is it's like, oh, I tried that, it didn't work, I'm not doing it. You're starting to reject those issues and those items. You never work through how to fix something that's broken, how to work through a relationship that had a bumpy road. Great partnership, you guys clashed for some odd reason, work through it, and then get back on track. If you don't work through those experiences, you don't have the skills to use when you really need them, when the stakes are high. Or in cases, what I think can happen is your business just can't stay afloat because problem or failure after failure just really, it almost sends you into a mode of almost like depression. Like it can send you in a mode where what you could do and what was working well, you're not doing. And I just think it's so important. Now, I don't want to make it sound like it's easy. I don't want to make it sound like when I started my business in 2009 and I started this agency that I was all like, yay, it didn't work. Yay, people didn't have the money to pay me. Yay, I'm learning, I'm becoming great, Stephanie. That's not how it feels in the moment. I want to keep it real that it's tough, it's hard, it's stressful. You're sitting around trying to figure out what to do. But I guess I want people to kind of take away from it. And what I've kind of learned is that these are all part of the journey, that we can't pick and choose or cherry pick sometimes the lessons that we need to learn, because often when you learn that lesson early, when you learn that lesson in the beginning, sometimes it's like the best experience you can have because you don't tend to repeat it. You might be able to keep it from happening again. You may be able to avoid it. And I really feel like some of those setbacks I had with building this agency, building it too big, building it with a huge team, like all of those things impact the way I hire today.
Yeah.
I don't tend to hire a lot of people at once. I don't tend to hire people for full-time positions if it's the first time I'm implementing something. I'm going to hire someone maybe in a part-time, or maybe hire a freelancer to get started so I can get the process going, so I can see if it's sustainable, to see if we can, make enough money to support it. And I think that's what those kind of failures, some of those setbacks and challenges do, is they help you in the future from making those same mistakes and adjust so that the falling off the cliff moment, you can potentially have less and less of them. Not none, but less and less of them as you move forward.
Yeah, I love that. And it's about, like you say, working, not just blocking the emotion, allowing yourself to feel it, not getting stuck in it, but actually feeling it and working through it. I think that's really important, because otherwise it's just that there's almost a sense of stoicism about it, like what you said about, oh, well, you failed, and yes, you can celebrate it, but allow yourself to feel that pain of disappointment. Otherwise it's kind of not authentic, and it's just being pushed down and can come back to bite you in different scenarios. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you've talked a little bit about that that vegan Black voices have been muted in the movement, and like, for example, you haven't been provided, and this is something that Curly Sue mentioned as well, you've not really been provided the same kind of channels and platforms as others. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that and what you would like to see happen?
Yeah. I really feel like there's just not enough space, and there's not enough visibility for the vegan Black community. And I mean that in like a lot of different levels. When you start to look at conferences, just go to the pages for conferences. And I know most of them are virtual and online right now, but even if you think back in the last couple of years and you just look at the faces on the page, the faces on the page aren't even diverse. There aren't a lot of different people speaking with different backgrounds, bringing that perspective to light. And if anyone is a conference organizer, if you're organizing a summit or an event, please make sure you reach out so diverse audiences are represented. Because if your speakers aren't diverse, it's harder to reach a diverse audience. And also, it starts to skew your message. We're talking about trying to make the world vegan. And if we're trying to make the world vegan, then your events, your activities, your tone, even down to the photos on your website, they cannot just represent one group of people. And I even say that for even someone like myself to self-examine, because I had someone call me out when I first created my website. I was like, oh, I'll just slap some photos on there. And then one of my friends was like, you don't have any Black folks on there. And I was like, you're right. He's like, I mean, you got like a hand in there or something like that. But he was like, why don't you? And what happened was, when I first started my site, someone else was building it for me. I just let them put the photos in there, and I was moving on. I wasn't thinking about the fact that the people on my website, the tone, the language, what I talk about shows what's important to me. So I had to make sure I paid attention, and I continue to try to pay attention, and I continue to try to make sure I'm not missing opportunities, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm perfect. But that's more and more what I'm doing. I'm making sure that when I show photos of people, that I'm showing women in positions, because it's very easy when you do photos and you look for photos, they'll show men in those like business leadership, corporate images. You don't see as many females in diverse photos.
Yeah, like stock image libraries, we should call them out big time. Like, I know whether it's women of color, it's like serious, like I totally get you. That needs to change big time.
Absolutely. So those are things. And then it's also these events that we're having. We have to make sure that there's content for these communities. Because when we talk about living the vegan lifestyle, our lives are a little bit different in different communities, in different towns, in different cities, even in different countries. So if you don't have someone who talks about the vegan lifestyle in the Black community, if they don't talk about the types of dishes that we eat and how to veganize those dishes, then what happens is we're missing out in the conversation. We're not a part of the process. We're not a part of the support that's being put out there. And I don't mean that everyone's got to go in there and start doing like stereotypical recipes. I don't want you to tilt the scale to the other side. But what I want people to do is to look at what they're doing. Look at the people that they interview if they have a podcast. If someone is putting out content and material, like we talked about recipes, make sure your recipes have ethnic types of flavors, ethnic type of kind of items that are used in certain type of cooking so that people can adapt it to their lifestyle. And if you don't know, I'm not asking you to reach so far out of your world that you're like, I don't know that world. I'm not aware of that world. Get a buddy, talk to someone, reach out to your customer base and say, hey, I want to share more recipes for the African American community. Would someone be willing to partner and help me? Would someone be willing to do that? Or, hey, I'm looking for speakers and I'd like to have someone who has this type of voice. And be specific. You don't want to like, I laughed with one of my clients, and maybe I shouldn't have laughed. It's probably not the best way to approach it, but it's almost like it's a little bit like that nervous laugh when you read something and you're like, ugh. That, one of my clients got an email from someone and they were like, I'm trying to make my conference diverse, so I thought you'd be a good speaker. And while I say things like I want it to be diverse, I also want you to get diverse experts. Like, I don't want you to just put a Black person in there so you can say, got Black. Like, I want you to make sure that you are getting experts and you're saying, I want somebody because of what they bring to the table, not just because I will look Black and look great on the screen for my diversity checkbox. It's important that we don't reduce people to superficial things like, well, I need more women, so I'm just going to put women in there. And I think that's where a lot of times people have the right intention, like that email that I was reading where they're like, I want to make it diverse. So they were just reaching out to anyone Black. That's where we make the mistake because we don't go far enough, where you really have to think about, what do you think you're not covering in your messaging? What do you think you're not addressing in your speakers or in your content? And getting into those specifics and bringing in those experts so that you can fill that as a knowledge gap, as a educational gap, as a perspective gap, not just for the Black gap or the female gap, or any other kind of, many of other groups that are marginalized. I tend to talk about the vegan Black community because I can talk firsthand, but there's plenty of other groups out there that are completely marginalized and not treated well in our vegan community. And I think we need to do better. We need to change.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's like you can work, because like I've organised a panel, this was years ago now, and I used to work for the queer community, and it was a social justice panel at this particular event. And I thought, right, and I did choose X, like obviously I wanted people in their field, but I was really like, I really want to make sure everyone's represented. So I had someone, representing from the disability community, the trans community, a sex worker community, because I wanted to do like the opposite, different, people from different, ethnic backgrounds. I ended up with about, I think, 11 people on the panel, and I felt like, and it was funny because I had one Asian woman on, and she laughed. She said to me, I guess I'm the token Asian lesbian. And we kind of like, again, it was that kind of laugh, and I was kind of like, how do I get out? Because I wanted to like make it diverse, but also it was like, you kind of don't want to appear to be tokenistic. It actually ended up being quite good because we actually had extra time. So we ended up having about 3 hours because there wasn't anything on happening. Oh, wow. But like if that was like an hour discussion, do you know what I mean? That probably wouldn't have been great because not everyone would have been able to talk. And then it would have been like quite tokenistic, like, people just sitting there and maybe talking for like a minute because there's so many people. But I guess it's that kind of thing. And I guess we're seeing that happen now with Black Lives Matter, that we saw certainly initially, you know, whether it was the vegan community or even the mainstream media kind of going, oh yes, okay, right, what, you know, how can we do better? But it was almost like and I, you know, I include myself even in that. It's like, it can be kind of, you know, is it that you're trying to look PC kind of thing? And not that I'm saying I want to do that, but it's like, do you know what I mean? There's that thing of how much is it that you're genuinely wanting to do it versus, like you said, wanting to tick the box and kind of look like you're doing the right thing. But then with doing that without being tokenistic, I guess these are kind of some of the things that are coming up. I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
Yeah, it's hard. And also, you can't pick up every cause. Like, you cannot be a part of everything, because for many of us, we just don't have the resources. You know, you're a small business, a small organization, you know, or you're doing an event, you may only have 4 slots, you know, for your event. You may only do a podcast once a month. So it's only 12 interviews you're doing. And I'm just using as examples. So I'm not necessarily saying, okay, well, I got 2 here and 2 there and 3 and so forth. The idea is that it's more about the practice and the principles and how you choose people. It's more about making sure you're challenging your thinking than necessarily getting it more in the, you know, kind of a to-do list. Like, I have this person, I have that person. It's about, what do you do in your business to make sure voices are heard outside of yours? What do you do to make sure you're doing things to amplify messages? How do you make sure that you're a part of the community that moves things forward? And then it's just taking some time every once in a while to self-evaluate, not to beat up, not to say what you didn't do right, because you can't be perfect. No one's asking you to. But what we want to be is at least self-aware, at least in my perspective, and to make sure that you are committed to something. I don't want you committed to like 50 things. And I don't want to commit to 50 things because I can't deliver on 50 things. I'm going to disappoint everyone. So I rather say, okay, this is what I want to do for the next couple of months to make that change. Like, one thing that we've been talking about is, do I do something like on a Friday and make it my, amplify my message Friday. It's my do social good Friday. It's my thing that I do where I make sure that some of my posts in my social media, it's just designed to support the community, to raise kind of awareness of stories that are not being discussed out in the media, or not big headline things, but are things that I feel people should know about. So it's just challenging yourself and making sure that what you do has a standard to it that you really would feel comfortable and confident in telling others about.
Nice. I like that. Thank you. Now, just my final questions, which are ones that I ask everyone. So these are kind of fairly brief kind of responses, because they're the same. So, what do you love most about yourself?
I think, that's a tough one.
I've asked this specifically because this is, conversation with vegan women leaders. And I know, like, it touches on what we said earlier about women not necessarily being used to putting themselves forward or to praising ourselves. So I thought I'm going to throw that in there and just get people to, kind of dig deep and just, acknowledge, what do you love about yourself? So take your time.
I think it's it's my kindness. Like, I really genuinely want people to be happy. I want people, and I don't mean fake happy, like put a smile on your face just because. I mean, I want people to feel like I'm in their corner. I want to cheer them on, that if I can help them, I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to try to be there. And I want to approach things with a kind perspective, meaning the decisions I'm doing, the things I'm doing, is it putting kindness out in the world? Is it putting good out in the world? So I guess maybe kindness / positivity, I would say.
Well, I can definitely vouch for that.
Superpowers.
You definitely do that. You definitely do that. I know I've personally experienced that, whether it's through a WhatsApp message or, a Zoom chat, you definitely do that. So I'd love that. What does leadership mean to you, and what style of leadership do you say that you embody?
I think I'm more about leading as example. So I think leadership is about not just talking about it, but doing things. And I think leadership, at least in my style, is I love to do things new, try things, sometimes be vulnerable and be willing to do things that are hard. You don't know how to do it. You may not know how to do it well, but do it with a little bit of grace and do it with a little bit of humility, but also do it knowing that you are still a leader. You can't lead from behind.
Mm.
So I try to make sure that I feel comfortable being in those leadership shoes, but also being respectful of the role that I'm in when I am a leader.
Nice. I love that. And just finally, just very briefly, final words of wisdom, or just something that you've learned, or a tip, or something that you would like to pass on to other vegan women leaders.
I think it's just believe in yourself, believe in the gifts that you have in the world, and believe that you have something to contribute, something that matters. No matter if it matters to 5 people, 5,000 people, no matter if 2 people show up to your live session, believe in your gift to the world and give it, because it's an amazing thing when you can give. And I just think we're such amazing people in the world. And if you don't believe in yourself, we're all going to miss out on it. And I'd be disappointed if I missed out on it too.
I love that. So where can we find you online? Is it your website is veganmainstream.com? Is that the best place for people to go to find, and then to be able to find out where else to connect with you on social?
Absolutely. You can go to veganmainstream.com. And then on all the platforms, we are just Vegan Mainstream. So if you're on Instagram, Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. I'm really huge on LinkedIn. I really enjoy it and I love connecting with people. So you can definitely connect with me there. Type in Vegan Mainstream or type in my name, Stephanie Redcross. Redcross is a very unique name.
Wonderful.
Even though I got married, so it's Stephanie Redcross West now. But most people can find me there. And I look forward to just connecting, collaborating, and meeting others out there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steph. This has been really great. You've shared so many wonderful words of wisdom. I personally got a lot out of this because I'm just learned more about you and how wonderful you are. So thank you very much. It's been great.
It's been great. Thank you so much as well.